You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Hey there, have you joined Impact yet? Remember, this is my new membership program for school counselors where you'll get access to monthly class lesson plans, small group curriculum, and individual activities. Plus, you'll get to connect with me and other school counselors through live Zoom calls and in our exclusive Facebook community. Wouldn't it be nice to have someone plan all of your counseling lessons and activities, provide the resources to you each month, and show you step by step how to use them, when to use them, and who to use them with? If you're thinking, heck yes, then Impact is made for you. Your counseling life is about to get a whole lot easier. So what are you waiting for? Sign up today at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So last week I talked to you about how to get started and kind of the basics of doing individual counseling sessions. So this week I want to talk to you about how to collaborate with the team. So that is parents and teachers. And this is how to collaborate so you can best support your individual students. So I have 3 strategies for you to try today. Number 1, hold a meeting. So this seems to be like the most basic strategy when you think of collaboration, but I encourage you to host a meeting with parents and teachers, and hopefully this is one that you can all attend together. So I know it can be tricky to kind of coordinate everyone's schedules, but think simple on this. It doesn't have to be like middle of the day big production, just it can be a quick 30 minutes is probably ideal, but 15, 20 minutes if you are limited on time before school or after school that the teacher and parent can get together. Now, oftentimes, I know it's hard to line up everyone's schedule, but, schedule it with the parent and then maybe the teacher can pop in for just a portion. They don't have to be there the entire time, if that helps. But the purpose of this meeting is that you want to discuss concerns and set goals. So I'm sure you've attended or are familiar with an IEP meeting. So these are those meetings that we have for special education students, and you are likely not part of your IEP team, but if you're familiar with them at all, they're always setting goals and then they're working toward these goals. So I like to do something similar in counseling. So when I get a referral and I'm planning for the student, I have like an end goal in mind. So for example, if they're struggling with self-regulation, maybe the end goal is by the end of their 8 weeks that we're meeting, they're going to be able to identify the 4 colors in the zones of regulation. They're going to be able to identify their feelings, their triggers, and then some coping strategies they can use. So that's kind of a goal. And now that I have that goal, when I go to plan my lessons, which I'll talk more to you about specifically planning in a couple weeks. But when I go to plan them, I can break down by each week and plan out a different objective. So for example, in our first session, we'll just build rapport by playing a game, and then I'll introduce the different colors. I'm not going to talk about triggers and coping strategies and everything right off the rip. So once you have your big picture goal, you can then break it down into individual objectives per session. So like I said, I'll get more into planning in a couple episodes, but that's just something I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking of like a goal. What should my goal be? So you want to go into this meeting prepared. So you're leading the meeting. So you're going to already have an idea of what the goal for the student would be and some possible objectives. Now you want to go in prepared, but not so prepared that you're concrete in your thinking and not available to tweak anything. So I suggest that you have like an overall idea of a goal in your plan for the student. That way you can communicate it to parents and teachers, but that you're also flexible for their input because they know the student really well, probably better than you do. So I hope the parent does and probably the teacher as well. So in the meeting, you can discuss concerns. So you already have the referral, so work off that, but maybe get a little background info on the student and find out what the concerns are at home, the concerns are at school, and why they want the student to receive counseling. Now, after you discuss concerns, and again, you're going to have an idea of your goals, but don't rush ahead. Take time to be patient and listen and really be there to hear the parents' concerns. Because while you are seeing lots of kiddos, and this is just one little blip on your schedule, this is their child and very important to them. So you want to make sure that they feel supported. The more we can help parents and teachers feel supported, then the easier it is to get buy-in from them. And then it's another way to, in turn, continually advocate for our role and our program. So these are just a few of the benefits of holding the meeting. Again, it doesn't have to be elaborate, just quick before, after school, before the sessions are starting. And, instead of emailing back and forth with the teacher about when you're going to meet, you could just do it right then. That way the parent knows when the meetings are going to be, you and the teacher can establish it, and everyone's good to go. You can also use this time to establish how you're going to communicate. So I'll talk about this as my third strategy, but you do want to have a plan for communication to keep everyone in the loop. So a lot of times parents or teachers don't know what's going on in counseling, and that makes them discredit the programs that we offer because there's just a lack of knowledge. So that's our responsibility and part of our job to bring awareness to counseling and advocate for our programs by being very transparent about what we're doing and how we're supporting students. So my first strategy for collaboration, hold a meeting. Simple as that. Now, of course, if you're virtual, a virtual meeting will suffice, or if you're in person but can't find time to see everyone in person, then a virtual meeting will work there as well. But I at least encourage you to have a video call. It just adds like a personal touch. Now, the second strategy for collaboration is to observe the student. So a lot of times, teachers will fall out of the loop on what's happening in counseling. Maybe a teacher makes a referral for social skills, and we're like, okay, yeah, we're going to see them once a week, and they know their student leaves to go see us, but they don't know anything else. So we can make an effort by going into their world. So I'll share a personal story. I worked closely with a teacher. Sometimes I feel like we have teachers who really get it and refer a lot of kids, and then you have those teachers who never refer anybody because they don't really get counseling or don't care for it. Perhaps they've had a bad experience in the past or something. But this teacher was, eager to refer students to me. She had a lot of students. It was like a tough class. So she was constantly referring kids, but I felt like she was frustrated, or I know that she was frustrated, because she would refer a student for something, and in her class it was a huge problem, but then they would come to me and we would, do activities or games, obviously to work on the problem. We're not just playing games in there. But I think in her eyes, from her perspective, it looked like I was the fun person they got to go to do all the cool stuff, and then they go back to her and she was like the mean disciplinarian. So it was a weird dynamic, and we wanted to be a united front, in supporting the student and not against each other. So you want to make sure that the teacher feels like you are on their side. And I know, actually, perhaps some of you listening, I know a few counselors who are in my Impact membership are former teachers, now counselors, and I always love when there's a former teacher who turns into a counselor, because I feel like they bring such a good perspective, because I don't have that experience. I went straight from, psychology background, and then of course I had a lot of different experiences in the counseling mental health world, but none as a teacher. I've never been a teacher. So I feel like that there's some things I will never understand about being a teacher. So I think that's why it's always cool when teachers become counselors, because they bring a really unique perspective. So if you are a former teacher, now counselor, let me know. I would love to hear your story. And please give us all advice. But anyways, I think it helps teachers feel supported when you come into their world, because this teacher was constantly telling me well, in class they're doing this, and I'm like, well, with me, I'm not seeing it, But, and of course, the joke is whenever you have an observation, the kid doesn't do the behavior that they've done a million times before. So, but to, make an effort, you want to go into the classroom, try to observe the student and see what the teacher's seeing, and see the student in their element. Then you can see them interact with other students. So perhaps, let's say it's an anger management is the topic, you can see how the student's handling frustrations in the classroom. If it's social skills, you can witness how they're interacting with other students. These are things that in an individual session you're not really going to see in the confines of your office. So it's good to get out and observe the student in their classroom. This does two things. First, you're getting to witness the behaviors firsthand, And second, you're showing the teacher some support and solidarity. Like, I get it. I don't have a magic wand that I'm waving in my office to fix things. I want to be like boots on the ground here with you, seeing how it's going down day to day. So I think observations are a tremendous way to collaborate with teachers, especially. So I have a blog post all about observations that I'll link to in the show notes. So you can head over there and read my tips for observations. And the third strategy I have when it comes to collaboration is to provide additional support. So there's a few different ways that you can do this. And the purpose to do this is to continue to support the student because, again, once a week for 20 minutes or so only does so much. That is feasible, and I'm not advising that you see a student 2 or 3 times a week. But I am saying in addition to the once a week individual session, there are other things that you can be doing. So, for example, and not only are you supporting the student this way, but this is a way that you can communicate with the parents and teachers, like I mentioned earlier. So, for example, you could create a behavior support plan. So perhaps this is a student who is struggling with a certain behavior, and that's why they're referred to you. I know that happens a lot. Now, maybe, hopefully, you have a behavior specialist at your school site, but I know that's kind of rare. So if you do, completely leave it up to them or collaborate with them, or if you do not, it may be your role. That's another blog post I will link to in the show notes where I wrote about how to create a behavior plan in a pinch, and I have a quick one there for you to access. So a behavior support plan is a great way that you can support the student outside. So if you're giving them some strategies for managing these behaviors once a week, the plan can kind of like monitor how they're actually implementing these changes. So, and that can be like a token system or, stickers, or it can be something tangible that they can see, like a behavior progress chart. So for example, let's say you have a student who is having a reoccurring behavior of interrupting the teacher, and you're working with them on the social skills. So once a week when you meet with them, you're talking about social skills and what's appropriate in certain settings and what's not. But then you can have an actual behavior chart that they have, like a piece of paper or digitally, with the teacher, and the teacher's marking if they were successful. You can break the day up into 5 different chunks, and during the first period or the first chunk, did they successfully not interrupt? And then you get a smiley. And then perhaps, let's say they get 3 out of 5 smileys or something, but you're sending it home with the students to parents or digitally, so you don't have to worry about losing it. And then the parents are signing it or acknowledging that they've seen it. So not only are you, helping the student by supporting them with this behavior or social skill they're working on, but you're also communicating with teachers and parents every day. They're not like, oh, I wonder what that counselor's doing. We went to that meeting a couple weeks ago. I haven't heard anything. Instead, you're, using the behavior chart as a means to communicate. And of course, you can touch base here and there on email as well, but this is just a way to communicate without verbally communicating, if that makes sense. Another example of additional support that you could provide is a workbook. So have students, maybe they're working on I mentioned before, I love to do like a self-regulation journal or self-regulation workbook. So they're doing a page or two, in the session with you. Maybe you assign some as homework, so to say, and then they do it at home and show their parents it. So I know I mentioned before about keeping their materials in their folder. So this is a different approach. There's benefits to both. Maybe you have a different copy so they don't lose it, or it really just depends on the age and responsibility level of the child, I guess. But if you think you can send it home and get it back, that's a great way to communicate with parents as well. Now, as far as communicating with teachers while providing additional support, is you can have students have like a little sticker chart or something on their desk. So let's say that you're working with a student on self-regulation, and you want them to be self-aware of their feelings, or when they're in the red zone, yellow zone, and so on. On their desk, you could have like a chart of their day, break it down into what their daily schedule is, and then they can indicate with like a sticker or a clip how their zones are changing throughout the day. So that's a way for the student to practice the skill. You're providing them additional support outside of your weekly session. And it's a way for the teacher to kind of see what you guys are working on. Like, oh, this is what she's doing with the counselor. She's learning, a coping strategy for the red zone. And then maybe She has like a little chart of possible coping strategies there, or a little toolbox to pick a coping strategy from. And that's a way that the teacher can support what you're working on in counseling, and everyone's on the same page. You don't want to be this little island, this little office where no one knows what happens in there. You want to be constantly communicating for two reasons. One, you're supporting the student. The more communication there is, the better you can all work as a team to support the student. You're only seeing them for a small amount of time. The teacher's only seeing them for a portion of time, and the parent's only seeing them for a portion of time. But together, you all are making up 100% of the time. So that's why it's important to work together as a team. And the second reason is, if people know what you're doing, that really speaks to your role and your value as a counselor, and you can advocate for your position just by doing your job, which is great. Now, a recommendation I have for you if you are meeting virtually, you can use a shared Google Doc to share progress. So what you can do is you can provide little updates in there about what you worked on with the student, and then the parent and the teacher can read that so they can check in on their own time and see what you've been doing with the student. That way they're not sending you an email. You want to avoid the back and forth email yo-yo. You don't want them to send you an email, hey, what have you guys been working on? And then you have to reply, and then so on and so on, and then the teacher asks you the same thing. You're just taking notes, so you're kind of keeping your own log and your own files. Now, you do want to be mindful of confidentiality and so on, but you're taking some little notes about, worked on this. The parents, teacher, the students see it, or not the students, the parents see it, the teachers see it. That's a way to communicate without communicating. So all of this is saving you time as well. You're not sitting down to be like, I got to email all these parents about what I did with their kids. You're just recording it there. Now, I also encourage you to use for your own records, not to share, a counseling log. So a counseling log will just have the date, the student's name, their area of need, what you worked on, and then if you had any parent communication or anything like that, and a notes section to kind of, talk about their affect or if something specific happened that you want to note. So I have a freebie counseling log for you that you can download. So I will link that in the show notes as well. So the show notes are great. They're full of all this good information. So don't forget to head over there after listening to this episode. If you're driving or working out or something, send me an email or a DM on Instagram at Bright Futures Counseling, and I will send you anything that I mentioned in the episode. So if you're like, what's that blog post you mentioned, or what about that freebie, just ask me and I'm happy to send it over to you. So those are my 3 strategies for collaboration when it comes to supporting our individual students. That is to, number 1, hold a meeting, number 2, do an observation, and number 3, provide additional support. I hope you found this episode helpful, and I will talk to you guys next week. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.